At 2:50 in the morning, 100 years ago today, a revolution in global communications took place that you may well never have heard of. The birth of international shortwave radio. It was a radio enthusiast, an American, Paul Godley, who set himself up in Ardrossan on the west coast of Scotland to wait with his equipment for the sound to come from Connecticut in the US. With the discovery that shortwaves could be bounced off the skies themselves came a huge expansion in their use by international radio networks. Now, a fair number of transmitters have been switched off, but shortwave is a stubborn survivor and remains important in places where totalitarian regimes can jam signals. Simon Potter is Professor of Modern History at the University of Bristol and author of Wireless Internationalism and Distant Listening. He took us back to the origins of shortwave tests in the 1920s.
This is a period where people are really experimenting with radio. You've got lots of servicemen who've returned to peacetime after the war, both in Britain and America. Some of them have been training using radio sets for military purposes during the war. Some of them souvenir some of their military equipment and bring it home with them. And in America, there are regulations, as elsewhere, on what you can do. One of the things that amateurs are allowed to do is experiment with shortwave, because people at the time think it's a useless part of the spectrum, and they get really interested in how far you can pick up signals over long distances, and they call themselves distance killers. The American Radio Relay League decided to send this man called Paul Godley to Britain to see whether he can pick up signals which are being transmitted from the east coast of the United States.
The crowd came down to the ship to say goodbye. There was an awful lot of jolly, excited kidding going on about how I simply had to get signals. And by way of getting back at them, I told them if that was to be a certainty, someone had better set up a station that I would be sure to hear. Now, as it happens, the first signal I heard in Scotland from an American amateur station was one which, oddly enough, was sending the letters PF, PF, PF over and over again. Now, that happened to be my own personal sign, as a telegrapher would say. And then, to my astonishment, came, "Hello, Paul," and the code number 73, which, of course, means best wishes.
He's in a field covered in seaweed on the coast, in a tent, heated only by an oil burner, in the middle of the night, in a howling gale, trying to pick up these signals. And they call him the conquering hero when he comes back.
Somewhat later, there came into that damned uncomfortable tent in Scotland that first historic and epic-making complete message to cross the Atlantic on shortwave.
One of the interesting things about these experiments is that the station, which is broadcasting from Connecticut, it's operating at a power of 50 watts. So that's basically the power of a light bulb. And if you compare that to the other technology that people are trying to use at the time for long-distance communication, which is long wave, you need a transmitter with about the power of a small town to operate one of those. So people realize it's actually a really efficient and effective and quite easy way of covering very long distances. So companies very quickly pick up on this. By 1927, you've got regular broadcasts from America and the Netherlands using shortwave, and the BBC picks it up too. So the BBC starts experimental shortwave broadcasting in 1927. By 1932, it's running its Empire service, which is the forerunner of today's World Service.
This is London calling.
You're tuned to the General Overseas Service of the BBC. This is the British Broadcasting Corporation.
Within a week, they put on the King's Christmas Day Empire speech, and that's George V. That's the start of the Royal Christmas Message, which we still have today on television.
Through one of the marvels of modern science, I am enabled this Christmas Day to speak to all my peoples throughout the empire.
Right from the beginning, people wonder if it's going to be an effective way of actually communicating using voices practically. The first BBC chief engineer who looks at setting up the Empire service says, he doesn't want to spend money chucking away money on making a loud noise because he doesn't think anyone will actually understand what you broadcast. It's because of the way it bounces off the atmosphere, signals get disrupted, you get all sorts of interference, they fade in and out, and even when they work out how to use shortwave, there are certain things you just can't do. So you don't want to have lots of background noise, you don't want to have particular sorts of music, anything with an orchestra doesn't come across very well. So it's often the medium for single spoken voice, and that works propaganda context because you want to get a simple message across.
You will now hear a statement by the Prime Minister. I am speaking to you from the Cabinet Room at 10 Downing Street.
And then shortwave is used as a way of evading the blocking that happened from totalitarian regimes.
Shortwaves are incredibly important in the Second World War when Nazi Germany and fascist Italy are trying to block BBC broadcasts. It's very important in the Cold War.
This is the North American service of Radio Moscow, broadcasting on 17.70.
You can cover very long distances. Unlike FM or medium wave, you don't need to have a transmitter right next to your target audience, so you can cross the Iron Curtain very easily. And because of the way shortwave works, bouncing off the upper atmosphere, it's very difficult to jam. So it's a great tool during the Cold War.
7.32, 7.18.
It strikes me as a sort of rather democratic medium in lots of different ways, not just because of democracies puncturing the Iron Curtain, but also because it is something that amateurs can pick up themselves and use themselves without great power-sucking transmitters. It's almost a sort of pre-internet internet.
Yeah, I think so. One of the phenomena that you see with it all is this whole world of sending requests to stations around the world, asking for confirmations of reports. People make their own cards, which they send off with little pictures of themselves by their sets. They all talk to each other as well. They create a virtual world for themselves, which is, in many ways international. So I think there are definitely echoes of that.
That was Professor Simon Potter with the audio of Paul Godley, thanks to his grandson Bruce Littlefield and the North Ayrshire Heritage Centre. Our closing headlines: the Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer has said it looks as though Boris Johnson broke the law last December